This world was not a cradle of life. It was an arena, a kingdom forged in ice and shadow, where the only law was the law of the Fang. For 10,000 years, this brutal empire knew only one ruler. One, but all thrones, even those built on a legion of fangs, are destined to crumble. This is the tragedy of the pack, and how the unbreakable bond was finally broken. Now, let the chronicle of this lost ruler begin. In this land of monsters, power was not measured in strength alone, but in numbers. It was a world ruled by the collective. The ground thundered with the march of titans, mammoths, mastodons, and giant bison. To challenge them was madness for any single predator. The throne of this kingdom did not belong to the swift, nor to the solitary assassin. It belonged to the pack. For 100 centuries, the dire wolf reigned. Their dynasty was the bedrock of this era. A sprawling, howling empire that stretched from the frozen plains to the sun-baked south. They were Canis dirus, the fearsome dog. But this name fails to capture the truth of their rule. They were not just animals. They were a philosophy of unity. They were the Legion, the unbreakable phalanx against which all rivals shattered. Their howls were the anthem of this world, a promise of loyalty to each other, and a declaration of war to all who challenged their collective crown. Their era seemed eternal, their foundation as solid as the continents themselves. But the tragedy of the dire wolf was not that they would be conquered by a rival. It was that they would be betrayed by the world they had mastered. To understand this dynasty, one must look past the individual and see the Legion. The lone wolf was a shadow, a single cog in a vast and terrible machine. Its true character was the pack itself, a single entity with 1,000 teeth, bound by a loyalty that was, for a time, the strongest force on the continent. The dire wolf was not built for speed. It was a creature of power and relentless endurance. Its frame was heavier, its limbs thicker, its jaw immensely stronger than its modern kin. This was not a design flaw. It was a statement of intent. The dire wolf was not an insurgent. It was the establishment. Its philosophy was not the swift ambush of the assassin, but the overwhelming, organized siege of a standing army. This legion hunted titans. Their prey were giants. And against a 2-ton bison or a juvenile mastodon, the strike of a single cat was a fleeting irritation. They were grappling hooks, designed to anchor, to hold and to crush bone. Their heavier bodies were the ballast needed to drag a monster to the earth. But these physical tools were secondary. The true weapon of the dire wolf was the unbreakable bond. This was the core of their philosophy, the secret to their 10,000-year throne. We imagine a pack as a family, but this was more. It was a military unit, moving with a single, coordinated mind. Their hunts were not chaotic chases. They were tactical operations. Scouts would test the herd, separating the target. The Legion would then flow around it, a tide of dark fur and steam. There was no hesitation, no individual ambition, only the collective will. One wolf would clamp onto a leg, another onto the flank, not in a frenzy, but in a systematic application of force. They were a living net, tightening with every second. The individual wolf did not need to kill. It only needed to hold its position, trusting that every other member of the Legion was doing the same. This was their demeanor. While the great cats ruled the shadows and the tyrant bear ruled by fear, the dire wolf ruled the open world. Their howls were the sound of an empire, confirming its borders. It was the sound of an unbreakable contract, a promise that the pack would provide, that the pack would protect, and that the pack would endure. For 10 millennia, this philosophy proved infallible. The Legion was invincible. And its greatest strength, this absolute, unyielding reliance on the pack, would soon become its fatal, tragic flaw. No dynasty, however mighty, is promised tomorrow. The dire wolf's 10,000-year reign was built on a single, sacred assumption that the world would provide. Their legions were designed to hunt titans, and the titans, in their turn, had always been there. This was the covenant, the unwritten law that allowed their empire to flourish. And there, the world broke its promise. A conflict that unthed this dynasty was not a rival predator. No saber-tooth, no great bear could challenge the sheer collective power of the pack. The dire wolf's arch nemesis was not a beast, but a betrayal. The world itself was changing. The ice, the architect of their kingdom, began to retreat. The air warmed. the great frozen plains receded, and the ancient flora that fed the Megafauna began to wither. This was not a sudden war, but a slow, creeping famine. The dire wolf subjects, the mammoths, the giant sloths, the ancient bison, began to vanish. Their numbers dwindled, their herds scattered, and the fortresses of flesh that the Legion was built to beseech simply disappeared. This was the central tragedy of the dire wolf. Their entire philosophy, their very anatomy, was a monument to a world that no longer existed. Their powerful jaws, built to crush the bones of giants, were now wasted. Their heavy, powerful frames, designed for endurance and grappling, were now a liability. The Legion's perfected strategy, the overwhelming siege, was useless against an enemy it could not see. How does a pack lay siege to an empty plain? A pack's loyalty was a contract. The individual served the Legion, and the Legion fed the individual. But now, the Legion was failing. The howls that once declared their dominion now carried a new, desperate edge. The hunts became longer, more grueling, and more often, they ended in failure. As the giants vanished, swifter, more agile prey remained, the ancestors of modern deer and elk. But the dire wolf was not built for this new war. It was the old guard, the heavy, bone-crushing aristocracy, suddenly forced to fight a war of insurgents. And into this vacuum, a new contender emerged. A lighter, faster, more adaptable creature, the Grey Wolf. This was not a battle of fangs, it was an economic collapse. The dire wolf dynasty was an empire built on gold, and the gold mines had run dry. The new world favored a different currency, one of speed and adaptability. And the dire wolf, for all its power, was suddenly bankrupt. The Legion was still a legion, but it was now an army of ghosts, marching through a kingdom that had forgotten them.